Rome didn't just rise. It exploded out of a single city-state and carved an empire that stretched from the misty forests of Britain to the blazing sands of the Middle East. For over 1,000 years, its armies seemed almost unstoppable. But here's the shocking truth. Rome's legions didn't always have the biggest numbers, or the best weapons, or even the strongest warriors. In fact, they were often outnumbered, far from home, and facing enemies who knew the land better than they ever could. So how did they win? Because the Romans were playing a different game. While others fought with passion, Rome fought with cold, ruthless calculation. They didn't just march into battle, they engineered victory. Their legions were machines of war, built on discipline, psychology, and brutal efficiency. And the secret wasn't in their armor or their swords. It was in their tricks. These weren't just battlefield maneuvers. They were traps, ingenious, devastating, and designed to break enemies, not just physically, but mentally. Today, we are revealing 4 of the most brutal tricks that made Roman legions one of the most feared military forces in history. Imagine for a second you're a Gallic warrior. You're strong, you're brave, and you're part of a massive horde, thousands strong, ready to crash against the Roman line. You charge, screaming a battle cry that sent lesser armies running for their lives. You smash into their front rank, and a vicious, desperate fight breaks out. Your sheer ferocity is overwhelming them. You cut down one soldier, then another. The Roman line is starting to buckle. Victory feels so close. But then, something strange happens. The Romans you've been fighting, the ones who should be exhausted, start to pull back. They don't break and run. They retreat with perfect discipline, slipping through gaps in a line of soldiers behind them. You surge forward, smelling blood, only to slam headfirst into a wall of fresh shields and fresh men. These guys are bigger, more heavily armored, and they don't look tired at all. They look like they've just been waiting for you. You've just run into the first and most fundamental of Rome's tricks, the aces triplex, or the triple line. This was the core of the Republican Roman army, a devastatingly effective meat grinder that wore down enemies through a relentless, systematic rotation. See, the Greek phalanx that dominated warfare before Rome was just a single, dense block of men. It was a hammer from the front, but it was rigid. If it got flanked, or if the ground wasn't perfectly flat, it could shatter. The Romans learned this the hard way, fighting agile tribes in the mountains of Italy. They needed something more adaptable. Their solution was basically a phalanx with joints. The legion was set up in 3 distinct lines, each with a specific job. The first line was the hastati, the young, eager, and less experienced soldiers. Their job was to absorb the enemy's initial fury. They were the first wave, meant to soak up that raw energy and bloody the enemy in the opening chaotic moments of the fight. Once the hastati were worn out, the order was given. They'd perform a tactical retreat, falling back through carefully maintained gaps in the second line. And waiting there, the principes. These were career soldiers, men in their prime, more experienced and better equipped. For an enemy who thought they were just about to break the Roman front, the psychological shock was insane. The exhausted men they were just fighting are gone, replaced by a wall of fresh, hardened veterans. The fight starts all over again. Only this time, you're tired, and the Romans aren't. And if by some miracle, you manage to push through the principes, you'd face the final line, the triarii. These were the oldest, most battle-hardened veterans in the entire legion. They fought with long spears, like an old-school phalanx, creating an unbreachable wall of death. The situation had to be truly desperate for the triarii to even join the fight. There was a Roman saying for a crisis, res ad triarios rediet, which means it has come down to the triarii. Facing them meant you'd survive the first 2 meat grinders, only to be met by the absolute best the legion had to offer. This system was so brutal because it was methodical. It turned a battle of emotion and rage into a cold, calculated process. The Roman legion was a conveyor belt of death, feeding fresh soldiers into the fight just as the enemy was starting to tire, grinding them down until nothing was left. So, the triple line was brutally efficient on the battlefield. But what happens when a disciplined line of infantry faces a weapon? It can't just stop with a shield. What do you do when the enemy unleashes living, breathing siege engines that weigh over 5 tons each? Let's go to the Battle of Zama, 202 BC. The Roman general Scipio Africanus is facing his nemesis, the legendary Hannibal of Carthage. Hannibal has a terrifying trump card, a whole line of war elephants, with some sources claiming as many as 80, all positioned at the front of his army, ready to charge and smash the Roman legions into chaos. War elephants were the heavy tanks of the ancient world. They were a psychological weapon, above all else, designed to create pure terror. They could trample men, shatter shield walls, and make even the most disciplined soldiers break and run. The Romans had faced them before and knew exactly how devastating they could be. Meeting them head-on was suicide. Hannibal expected his elephant charge to be the decisive blow that would shatter Roman morale right from the start. He gave the command. The ground begins to tremble as these behemoths charge forward. But Scipio did something nobody expected. He used the legion's greatest strength, its flexible formation, to create the perfect anti-elephant trap. Instead of forming a solid wall of shields, Scipio arranged his men in columns, leaving wide, clear lanes running from the front of his army all the way to the back. From Hannibal's perspective, the line probably looked solid enough. As the elephants thundered closer, Roman skirmishers, the velites, darted out to throw javelins, trying to annoy and confuse the animals. Then came the master stroke. Just as the elephants were about to hit the main line, a deafening blast of horns and trumpets erupted all along the Roman front. Panicked by the noise and goaded by the javelins, the elephants did what any terrified animal would do. They took the path of least resistance. That path led them right down the open corridors Scipio had created. Instead of crashing into a wall of men, the elephants just charged harmlessly through the gaps. As they ran through these channels, Roman soldiers on either side jabbed at their flanks with spears, enraging them further and making sure they couldn't turn back into the Roman ranks. Many of the elephants just ran straight through the army and out the other side. Some, driven completely mad with pain and fear, even wheeled around and crashed back into Hannibal's own lines, causing the exact chaos they were supposed to inflict on the Romans. It was brutally clever. Scipio didn't try to match the elephants' strength. He just got out of their way. He used Roman discipline to neutralize his enemy's most feared weapon and turn it right back on them. The elephant charge that was meant to win the battle became the first step in Hannibal's ultimate defeat, all thanks to one simple, brilliant trick. Roman brutality wasn't just for the heat of battle. They knew an army was never more vulnerable than when it was on the march or setting up for a siege. A sudden ambush from the woods, a surprise night attack, these could cripple even the strongest army. So, the Romans developed a trick to solve this. They just brought their fortress with them. This trick really had two parts. The first is one of the most iconic images of Roman military power, the Testudo, or the tortoise. Imagine you're on a fortress wall as a Roman legion approaches. You and your friends are ready to unleash a storm of arrows, stones, and spears. But as the legionaries get closer, they start to change. The men in the front lock their massive, curved shields, their scuta, together into a vertical wall. The men behind them raise their shields over their heads, overlapping them like shingles on a roof. Within moments, the legionaries disappear and are replaced by a single armored shell. It looks like a giant walking tortoise, and it's coming right for you. Arrows just bounce off the top. Spears glance away. Rocks clatter and roll off harmlessly. Underneath this mobile roof, the Roman soldiers march forward, slow and steady, but completely protected. The psychological effect must have been chilling. You're throwing everything you have at this thing, and it just keeps coming. Once it reached the base of your wall, the formation would break open, and fresh, unharmed soldiers would pour out with swords drawn, ready to attack. The Testudo was the perfect tool for advancing under fire, but it was part of a much bigger idea. The second part was even more audacious. Every single night, on every single campaign, a Roman legion built a fully fortified marching camp from scratch. And this wasn't just a circle of wagons. This was a masterpiece of military engineering, and they could build it in a few hours. After marching 20 miles, a legionary's day wasn't over. Part of the army would immediately get to work. They'd dig a deep ditch, throw up a tall earthen rampart, and top it with a fence of sharpened stakes. The camp inside was a perfect grid, with streets, a command center, and fortified gates. It was a temporary fortress that could pop up literally anywhere. This discipline made the legion almost immune to surprise attacks. While their enemies might be sleeping in the open, vulnerable to a raid, the Romans slept behind walls, protected by sentries and a network of defenses. Julius Caesar took this to the absolute extreme at the Battle of Alesia, where he didn't just build one wall to besiege the Gauls inside. He built a second, outer wall to keep a relief army from attacking him. He literally trapped an army between two fortresses of his own making. This combination of the tactical Testudo and the strategic marching camp meant the Romans could project power with total security. They were a fortress on the move, an unstoppable force that carried its own protection, grinding its way across the ancient world. For our final trick, let's look at a situation that spelled doom for most armies, being massively outnumbered. When you're facing a seething horde of warriors, a simple shield wall can be crushed by sheer weight. For this, the Romans had a surgical and psychologically crushing trick, the cuneum, or wedge formation. The perfect and most brutal example of this is the Battle of Watling Street in 61 AD. The Roman governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, had about 10,000 men. Facing him was the British Queen Boudica, leading a coalition of tribes that, according to Roman sources, numbered over 100,000. The Britons were fighting for their homes, filled with righteous fury, and they crashed against the Roman position in one massive wave. Suetonius had picked his ground carefully, a narrow gorge with forests protecting his flanks, forcing the massive British army to attack him head-on. After weathering the initial charge and throwing volley after volley of their heavy javelins, the pila, into the dense British ranks, Suetonius gave the order to advance. But they didn't move forward in a simple line. The historian Tacitus, who recorded the battle, says the legionaries advanced in a cunum, a wedge. Picture a triangular spearhead of armored legionaries, with the toughest soldiers at the very tip. This formation wasn't meant to just push the enemy back. It was designed to puncture them. It focused all the force of the advance onto one single, narrow point in the enemy line. For the disorganized Britons packed at the front, the effect was terrifying. Instead of a broad wall of shields, they saw a sharp point of steel and death driving right for them. The tip of the wedge would hit, creating a small tear in their line. The soldiers behind would then pour into that gap, relentlessly widening the breach from the inside out. This wasn't just a physical tactic, it was psychological warfare. An ancient army's strength came from its cohesion, from fighting shoulder to shoulder. The wedge shattered that cohesion instantly. The British line didn't just bend or break, it was torn open from the center. Warriors who were just fighting alongside their kinsmen suddenly found disciplined Roman soldiers on their flanks, and then behind them. Panic is contagious, and the wedge was designed to spread it like a virus. As the center collapsed, the rupture spread outwards. The Britons, brave but undisciplined, lost all formation, and their massive numbers became a death trap. They were packed in so tightly they couldn't maneuver or even run away. The Roman victory was total and horrific, an absolute massacre made possible by a tactic that didn't just aim to defeat an army, but to shatter its will to even exist. The three-line meat grinder, a system of relentless rotation that ground down enemies with fresh waves of men. The elephant killer, an adaptive trap that turned an enemy's greatest weapon against them. The fortress on the move, making the legion an unstoppable, self-sufficient war machine. And the line breaker, a surgical wedge designed to shatter an enemy's formation and morale from the inside out. These tricks show us why the Roman legion is still considered one of the most formidable military forces in human history. Their dominance wasn't just about brute force. It came from a deadly mix of ingenuity, ruthless discipline, and a deep understanding of the psychology of battle. They didn't just outfight their enemies, they outthought them, leaving a legacy of strategic brilliance we still study to this day. If you enjoyed this look into the brutal and brilliant tactics of Rome, be sure to crush that like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into history. What Roman tactic do you find the most ingenious or terrifying? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.